Carolyn Chun is the Deputy Director of the Multnomah County Library in Portland, Oregon, and a former member of ALA's Public and Cultural Programs Advisory Committee. And Mary Davis Fournier is back with us. She is the Deputy Director of the American Library Association's Public Programs Office and the Director of the National Impact of Library Public Programs Assessment. With that, I will turn things over to Mary, and we will get started. Welcome back, Mary.
Thanks, Dan, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we share research findings from the NILPPA Research Initiative. As Dan said, I'm Mary Davis Fournier from the ALA Public Programs Office, and we're assuming that by tuning into this webinar, especially if you're tuning in for the second webinar in a row this week, that you're involved in as a creator of or teacher of or fan of library public programs, and perhaps have been following the National Impact of Library Public Programs Assessment, or NILPPA, research through our website, nilppa.org. If you haven't already, please share where you're from in the chat box. And before we go further, I'd like to ask you to respond to two quick polls that will help us understand which types of libraries and librarianship are represented here with us today, and where your institution is in terms of staffing for programming needs. So I'll let Dan cue those up.
Yep, this is Colton with ALA Publishing. Those are on the right side of your screen now. You've got about 40 seconds to put in your answer for each poll. You'll see that there's two separate poll questions in there. You can just click and submit your answer to each one. If you find yourself running out of time or having any trouble with that poll section, we would also love to hear your responses into the text chat space.
Great. Thanks, Colton. And while you're all responding to those polls, I'd just like to mention that both Monday's webinar and today's webinar provide an overview of our ALA findings that we have released this week through a white paper and an accompanying summative report. You can find all of that at nilppa.org. So our first webinar addressed and shared findings regarding sort of the full dimensions of library public programming today, and this webinar is going to delve into competencies, skills, and expertise that library workers need to deliver effective library public programs. So looking at these poll responses that are coming in, it looks like we are predominantly public library workers here today, closely followed by academic library folks and others. So, and some special library folks. And some folks that just didn't feel like answering that question. There'll be another poll later in this webinar that you can answer. And the majority, it looks like, of our respondents today have said that their library doesn't have staff whose sole responsibility is programming. But I think, well, in chat, I'm sure you can share all the programming that you do, whether it is, even if it is not your sole responsibility. So these responses will have a lot of bearing. I think you'll see that they're mirrored in our findings throughout this webinar. So thank you. So this research would not be possible without the support of the Institute of Museum and Library Services. They provided both the initial planning grant and the Phase 1 grant for this project. Nor would it have been possible to conduct this research without the expertise and collaboration of New Knowledge Organization, a leading interdisciplinary social sciences think tank that has been our research partner in this initiative. We'll also talk about the wonderful group of library practitioners and researchers who led this work. Today, I am joined by Carolyn Chun, one of the dedicated NILPPA Research Committee members who has really guided this work through both the planning and current phase of the research. And Carolyn leads public services across 19 library locations and divisions at the Multnomah County Library in Portland, Oregon. Pardon me. And her expertise as a practitioner, a manager, and someone who came up through the ranks in programming has been a fantastic guiding force for us here in this research. Briefly, our agenda today, what we'll talk about is some context, what we have as a field experienced and observed in the LIS field that has compelled this research, a bit about the NILPPA initiative and goals overall, the defining key terms component of this research that has been essential to getting us all sort of on the same page as we look at competencies and library programming. Our findings, the 9 core library programming competency areas that we are sharing today, and learning pathways, how we get to those, fulfilling those areas. And then we'll have some time, hopefully at the end, for questions and discussion of implications. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Teralyn to lend some context to this work.
Thanks so much, Mary. I'm very excited to be here today with you to present the results of this project. As someone who worked in library public programming for more than 15 years, I've seen how important public programming is as part of library service, and so I'm really excited that this project came about. U.S. libraries are transforming to meet the changing needs of their communities. Public programming has risen to the forefront of daily operations in libraries. And programming that used to be instruction in library use, special events designed to get people into the library, or a bait and switch for getting people to leave with a book, has now become fuller, richer, and more broad. Today, programming is accepted in its own right. Learning through experience and learning through exposure to new ideas presented in non-literary form is seen as valuable. The traditional role of libraries has expanded. Today we are more than just lenders. Today we are now meeting places, theaters, classrooms, laboratories, lecture halls, and more. And in the years that I've been doing public programming, I've actually seen what used to be considered programming 15 years ago to be different now even. So, for example, we used to focus a lot on youth programming with an occasional book group author or lecture, and now we have more variety in our programming. For example, at Multnomah County Library, we do 6-sit workshops, a lot of do-it-yourself workshops. We have urban goat farming programs and beekeeping programs. We kind of taken our book groups and kind of done them a little differently. So we have a book group with a purpose where someone will a group will read a book, and then they will have a volunteer project related to it. And additionally, we have started to develop more culturally specific programming, especially for our target audiences. Can someone help me with my slides here a little bit? Someone can advance the slides, that would be great. Thank you. And next slide. So now we're going to talk about, if you want more proof of how the way people are using libraries is changing, there's a slide here about the changes in academic library circulation. You can see university libraries across the country are seeing steady declines in the use of books on their shelves. Right here you see Yale's Bass Library book circulation numbers are down 54% in the last decade. The slides show the drop in circulation at 2 university libraries from 2008 to 2018. On the next slide, you'll see that public libraries are experiencing similar declines, but much less. Slight declines in circulation to date, but other services are increasing. For example, over the last 5 years, library programs have grown at twice the rate per capita as the decrease in per capita circulation. The next slide talks about for an example at our library system, our physical circulation is down 15% over the past 5 years. Our digital checkouts are actually up 22% just last year, and overall those past 5 years, 260%. So for us, our overall circulation is kind of flattening out right now. That it's important to note right here that increase in digital has some implications. Because so many more people are using the library digitally, there are fewer reasons for them to come into the library. And so outside of CERC, the impact of technology has just made it so that people get together less. That is important to note because programming can bring people together. On the next slide, to see how public programming has become more important in our work. In 2016, 5.2 million programs were presented, and that's a 72% increase since 2010. There's a whole website devoted to library programming called programminglibrarian.org. We have 6,556 members there, and that's a 58% increase from March 2015. On the next slide, you'll see that if you do this work, you know what the benefits of programming are for both the individuals, the communities, and the library. Individuals benefit from the knowledge, skills, confidence, awareness of library service, and new social contacts made through attending library programs. The community benefits from the increased knowledge and skills gained by individuals from the strengthened partnerships between community agencies working in partnership and from the increased community cohesion created among individuals who attend programs. Libraries benefit from greater engagement of patrons, increased visibility of the library, connecting the library to the community, the idea of the library being a community center, the potential for a greater community support. And some of these examples would be citizenship classes, English conversation cafe, adult literacy classes, citizen ceremonies. Skokie Public Library has these, as do we. And all of these have helped the library connect with diverse immigrant populations that otherwise might not feel the public library is for them. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mary now.
Thanks so much, Darylyn. I'm going to talk a bit about just NILPPA broadly, but currently this is born of the fact that little national data has been available. Through data collection, we felt that we could learn what makes the program effective, gather information that would assist in future programming planning and resource allocation, and be able to effectively advocate for increased funding and support for libraries. So the national impact of library programs assessment, is a few straightforward overarching goals that are born of these dynamics in this context that Carolyn just set up for us. The exploring really the impact of library public programs, documenting the characteristics, outcomes, and value of public programs, and contributing information to help future generations of library workers are these overarching goals. But our ultimate goal is to advance library public programming in all types of libraries across the country. So this has been a multi-year, multi-part research project that explores all of these impacts. And, we really wanted to look at the current state of things. Many individual libraries report data about their programs on a system level through fabulous platforms like Project Outcome, but the library fielded little aggregate data on this subject when we started this. To get a better picture of library programming, we will help us ask ourselves and those outside of the field really important questions about what impact library programming are having at a community level. And we hope to find out how the focus on programming has impacted public perception of libraries. And by putting together this very foundational research through NILPPA, we will be able to better prepare future generations of library workers. So to grapple with all of this, we needed to answer two foundational questions to ensure that we have an understanding of the field and that we are all using a common language. And these two questions were the focus of this phase of the research. Question 2 is the focus of this webinar. What competencies and training are required for professionals working with library programming today? In addition to ALA staff and the New Knowledge team, this project was really guided by and led by research groups of practitioners and LIS instructors. And in this case, the Competencies group consisted of course, Carolyn Chun, who's with us today, Michelle Besant, who's the Associate Director of the iSchool at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Janine Golden, who has was the Associate Professor in the Master Management in Library and Information Science program at the University of Southern California Marshall School of Business. And before this team could fully pursue our research, we needed to ensure that we had agreement, not just from our group of researchers, but from the field on the meaning of the language we were using to define terms and areas of competency. So here are the big ones that we grappled with. The definition of program. We started with the IMLS definition of program. Our group found that this definition was a bit overly broad for the present study for this research because it included some types of programs that are not public programs. And in conversation with the full project team, including both researchers and advisors, we recognized the need for additional definitions to anchor our study. So first we needed to define public, and second the team agreed to exclude instruction from our definition of programming. So, a member of our team proposed an alternate definition, which we used with our focus groups, and we refined over time through our validity study to our current working definition, which is here. A program is a proactive and intentional service in a social setting developed to meet the needs of an anticipated target audience. So then what was left was for us to pull this into what is a public program. A public program we have defined as a service or event in a group setting developed to meet the needs or interests of an anticipated target audience. So all libraries, no matter what type, have a public. That public is the audience the library tailors its programs to and the people the library serves. And then for the purposes, of course, of our conversation today, what do we mean by competency? So our group felt that this was the easiest for us to answer. We did not have to look further than the Library Leadership and Management Association, LLAMA's definition, to agree on a definition of competency. The professional competencies comprise the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are teachable, measurable, and objective that define and contribute to performance in librarianship. And that a competency has two dimensions, knowledge, skill, or ability, and the level of mastery of that knowledge, skill, or ability. So to understand the specific competencies required for library programming professionals, first we looked at how the library field perceives competencies overall. And we engaged in a complex and multidimensional and multi-phase process to determine these program competencies. We reviewed the competencies from the field as a whole. We looked at job descriptions. We reviewed websites from myriad programs, and then we took all of those findings and confirmed and revised everything with focus groups and surveys with library workers. So I'm going to spend just a few moments to go through what our methods involved. So for MLS program curricula analysis, we reviewed 58 of the 60 English language programs, I should say all 58 English language programs among the 60 ALA accredited university programs. And this included looking at their course listings, specializations, concentrations, and the highlighted competencies in those programs. Then we looked at job listings for library positions. We looked at postings on ALA job list. We looked at other state and city level job pages. We looked in state level library association job lists. And as far as we could throughout the field, we searched for keywords with terms such as outreach and programming in order to pull these up. And we saw, in many cases, the word program coming up again and again in library positions. Next, we confirmed and refined what we learned. We did this through an emailed survey to library workers sent very broadly. We sent that out in 2 waves, and this describes who responded. And as you can see, again, going back to our poll in this webinar at the beginning, the majority of responders sort of mirror who's with us today. Public libraries, college and academic libraries, research libraries, school librarians, special libraries, many others throughout. So we tried to pull in everyone. And then we wanted to go further to make sure that this was an extremely inclusive process. So we're determined to include as many voices involved in programming as possible. So we conducted in-person interviews with groups of library staff from all types of libraries during ALA annual conferences in 2018. Library workers participated in 90-minute forums hosted by our research partner, New Knowledge, and we invited participants by type generally, so similar library workers could be in the same group. We then went and supplemented those forums with individual interviews and virtual convening opportunities to ensure the inclusion of underrepresented voices, such as tribal libraries. And by that I mean voices unrepresented in the breadth of the research, who we find are also traditionally underrepresented generally in the field. So now we are going to be able to share with you what all of this data, landscaping, surveying, individual feedback resulted in. It resulted in identification of 9 competency areas that support excellent public programs in all types of libraries. These are knowledge of community, interpersonal skills, creativity, content knowledge, evaluation, financial skills, outreach and marketing, event planning, and organizational skills. And Carolyn and I are going to spend a few minutes just going through these identified competencies in a little further detail. So knowledge of the community. What we meant here was open-mindedness, listening skills, intercultural and diversity skills, and group-specific skills, such as knowledge of child development or language skills. And Carolyn, are you able to give some examples of this?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Sure. So knowledge of the community, some of the examples that we've had is we have Russian language staff who were hearing from parents that they didn't understand how the public school system worked and really wanted to learn how to better advocate for their kids. So we pulled together a program that brought school administrators and counselors in that explained to parents in Russian language, which is the service that we provided, how to better navigate the public school system.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so then we'll keep moving through this and giving examples as we go along. Interpersonal skills, by that we meant people skills such as customer service, networking, communicating, public speaking, and facilitation. The methods, that you use to interact effectively with many different audiences all day.
And for us, this meant, being able to identify programs where partners would be would add value to a particular program or bring a specific type of expertise. So having a good network of knowing who you could call on, someone you could bounce ideas off of, and then again being able to communicate effectively across different disciplines and in different types of organizations.
Great. And organizational skills. In addition to basic administration and management skills, this competency included diplomacy and management skills with outside organizations.
So this has to do with making known and understanding the goals of all the different partners and being able to articulate the benefits to each partner on a more practical angle for individuals, just getting familiar with the rules and policies of your organization. Examples of things like how to pay for fees, how to pay for supplies, and things that are specific to the library that you're working in.
Terrific. Creativity. So this is a broad category that incorporates everything from developing unique and personalized programming to flexibility, problem solving, to designing online communications and graphic pieces, to maintaining a flexible and responsive spirit.
At Multnomah County Library, we oftentimes have to do some programming on a shoestring, so it's being able to be creative about how to deliver programs with particular constraints, how you might change up a program or even do some mashups to combine different things, different programming that you're interested in doing. For example, how to do a health and nutrition program without a kitchen, figuring out how to do that, and there are ways to do that if you're interested in knowing. Here is a Great Stories Club, and I think, Mary, did you want to talk a little bit more about this?
Oh, yeah. No, I can't resist because this is a program we were involved in. This is actually a picture from an academic library program. The librarian at Research and Instructional Librarian at Towson in Maryland partnered with Baltimore Public Schools in a collaborative program for high school and college-age students. And she connected the high school students with university students who were involved in Towson's Black Student Union to really provide a window into what activism and engagement on a college campus can look like. So their definition of program became expanded and fluid too. And in the photo, the students are holding up collages that finish the statement, "People think I am, and today I know I am." Anyway, we could talk for days about creativity in the field, I know. So event planning. This area requires two types of skills, logistical skills and the ability to set the tone for the event. And the latter requires sensitivity and understanding of the nature of the audience and flexibility in establishing the appropriate environment. As you will hear, many of these competency areas really flow into each other as well.
So from a logistical standpoint, it's understanding things about like when you will need to rent materials or equipment, things like sound systems, things like tents, tables, chairs, how to do room setups. If you're serving food at programs, are there any food handling guidelines that you need to adhere to? When you're trying to set that tone and establish an appropriate environment, again, there's a little overlap with understanding the community and the audience that the program is designed for. So, understanding some, cultural things that would make culturally specific things that you should take into consideration with programs. A lot of the other language groups that we present programs for, they're family programs. They're not so much segregated as adult and children. So making sure that, culturally you're inclusive, if that's an important element of programs.
Great. And so outreach and marketing, a variety of skills are needed here to ensure that programs meet the community's needs and interests. They include targeted communication strategies that inform and build support and use digital and social media effectively.
So this is just kind of understanding, again, who your program is for and how they like to hear about it or how they might hear about it. Lots of times it's word of mouth, especially programming for underserved communities. So getting the message out to trusted sources. For us, an example is like when we want to reach our Russian community, we go through the churches because that's where a lot of that community life centers. That's how we get out a lot of things, information about programs. The other thing is, like, if you're doing an online story time and you're trying to promote that and you outreach to people who might be interested in it, use your social media channels because that's where a lot of those people get their information from.
Great. And so content knowledge, these skills, they can be specific to a program, a library, or a community culture, but at minimum, they require the ability to assess program quality, presenter qualifications, validity of source material, community engagement theory, and principles of inclusive practice.
And this can take a lot of time to evaluate and screen programs and presenters. Asking yourself the questions, what are you trying to achieve with this program, the learning that you want to see as an outcome, and any other goals. At Multnomah County Library, we actually have a form for presenters that they will fill out online, just telling us, basically what they're proposing that they do, and then give us some background information and references. A lot of times it's really hard to get out and see these programs, every single program that is a potential program for your library. So a lot of times we'll rely on calling other libraries that have had the program before and getting references and things. But just again, knowing what it is you're going to what your program is going to have in it, especially if it's a program that the library is presenting, because you don't want any surprises about what that presenter might be putting out there.
Yes, those surprises. So evaluation. Core assessment skills, I think most of us are very familiar with them. They're going to continue to be required, along with a greater focus on culturally responsive evaluation and targeted assessment of relatively small populations, including the ability to measure changing needs in the target population.
We all know kind of the standard ways of doing it, evaluation. You have maybe a card that just asks people to rate the overall quality of the program, the quality of the presenter, and if you have outcomes, you could put those on an evaluation too. Some evaluations can be done electronically. If people have registered for your program and you have their email address, you can send out surveys post-program and get some evaluation that way. All of what's important about the evaluation is that it should be always ongoing and using evaluation information that you gather to refine your program. And that should be a constant thing because as, again, community needs change, you're going to want to always be looking at how you might adjust programs and adapt them to fit those needs. When you reach out to, for Multnomah County Library, we actually have our survey form in all of the targeted languages. So that's available, and also being aware that the outcomes for those audiences might be different, and so you might have to ask different questions depending on the specific program.
Great, and I can add, one of our partners in this research was PLA and Project Outcome. We also partnered with the state libraries and the Measures That Matter initiative, and we looked at a number of other sort of evaluation and assessment initiatives that are taking place on a local, regional, and national level. And the abundance of resources that are out there has really risen. There's really just a lot. It's great. So financial skills. Programming professionals can expect to be increasingly involved in budgets related to space use, rentals, construction, renovation, as well as basic fundraising and budgeting, grant writing, both in sponsorships, both internally and with collaborative partners.
And this is, again, will probably be really specific to the organization you're working in. If there's a specified amount for public programming, or if you're going to have to be working across different divisions or different departments or different parts of your organization to cobble together funds. The other important thing to think about is fundraising outside of what is budgeted in your organization, and you can do that collaboratively with partners. If you're fortunate to, in our case, have a library foundation and the Friends of the Library organization, those are always good sources to look to as well for support. And again, that whole collaboration, the skills needed to do that, we covered some of that in the previous competencies.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to put this up here one more time. This visual is included in our white paper at NILPPA.org, and it'll also be available as a downloadable PDF. And, we would like to hear from you. So we have another poll that relates to our next group of findings. We've identified the competency areas, and we also looked at the pathways library workers use to these skills, expertise, and knowledge required to create or present excellent library public programs. So I will, let Colton queue up the next poll and then turn it over to Tara Lynn to share our findings about where people are getting this knowledge and where the opportunities lie.
All right, thanks, Mary. The poll is just now appearing on the right side of your screen. You can check all of these that apply, and the question is, where did you learn to plan public programs? You can select as many as you'd like there. You've got about 20 seconds to put in your answer. Again, we know it's not a ton of time. We just want to make sure things are moving. So if you don't have time to get your answer submitted in there, please feel free to just respond to the chat and tell us where and how you learned to plan public programs. All right, just a few more seconds left to get in your answers, and then we're going to take about 15 more seconds to tabulate the results. All right, so that should be closed now. If you've already started, you can finish up your answers. And again, if you didn't have time, feel free to just type into the chat space to respond and let us know where you learned to plan public programs. And we just need a few more seconds to tabulate the results. And I can see them from the preliminary results that most people have selected on the job. Mm-hmm. All right, there are those results.
All right. And this feels very familiar to me as someone who learned on the job. I'm not surprised at all what we see here. In the research, we found that most schools offer coursework on public programs, but that nobody requires it. 50 of the 58 schools offered courses on planning and running library programs. All of these courses were elective. I have to say, in my library school education, we didn't have any. So that I'll just say that there were none offered. When it is offered, most courses on programs focus on some particular audience. And an overwhelming majority of course titles reference program audiences, which provides insight into how librarians categorize programs. In particular, library schools primarily divide up programs by the age of their attendees, and just about half of all courses on programs focused on running programs for children or teens. And this definitely goes, again, along with what I experienced when I was going through library school. Related to the degree programs, those 3/4 of the survey respondents in the research project hold a master's degree in library science. Responses diverged as to whether the schooling is useful for running library public programs. Only about half of them said that they learned programming skills in their degree program. And those who felt that the coursework was unhelpful often cited professors who were removed from the day-to-day experience of running programs or changes in the years since the librarian had completed their degree. So that leads us to informal training. And actually, the research that we did showed that certain skills actually may be best learned in an informal setting. Informal learning opportunities contribute enormously towards developing competencies. More than 93% of respondents said that they had learned on the job, while 74% said they had other informal training, like webinars or workshops, and 62% said they learned from colleagues. So what does this all mean? Let's see here. And how do competencies fit into our work? This is just a little wordle about of the kind of themes that came up during the research, things that kind of were surfaced as most important in terms of competencies. And you can see there organizational knowledge, skills management, a lot of the things that we covered in the competencies. This is important to think about when you're developing jobs and job descriptions. It's important if it's a part of somebody's position to how you're going to evaluate that work. It's important when you're looking at the skills for people who are applying for these types of jobs, who is being hired, what are the most important things, what are things that are that just people need to come with, what are things that can be taught, what are things that are specific to your organization that can be taught as well. And I think it's important that we have consideration of our MLIS programs and the curriculum content. If that needs to happen, if there's certain things that need to be happening at that level, what are they and how can those programs in that formalized education environment best deliver on that? And also, it's important for us to start thinking about the direction for continuing education and mid-year career professional development. So if you go to library school and you learn, sort of the foundational or theoretical ideas behind presenting public program, what are the things that you're going to need to have going forward? And what can you do to get those skills and keep up on that continuing education? Now I think we're going to go back to Mary, and hopefully it looks like we have some good time to hear about other people's questions, and if anyone else wants to share what's happening in their libraries, that would be great too.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. So what we'd like to do right now is ask people to share how this, in chat, certainly, how this resonates with you, all of this, a lot of information coming at you, but also please do take a moment to type questions into the chat box, and Dan or Colton will make sure that we're able to answer every question we can, and I love that we're on time in the next 15, 20 minutes. And I'm going to, while you're doing that in the chat box, I'm going to remind you again to check out the NILPPA.org website, where we've published the white paper, and our summative report has lots of details, another publication there on the data sets, and delves into what our findings are across these two questions even more. And if your questions don't come to mind in this webinar, our website also has a robust comment capabilities, and we really would love to hear from you on those. And while folks are also posting to chat, I would want to thank a number of people, Carolyn and Dan and Colton from ALA Publishing, New Knowledge, and of course IMLS, and the fantastic team that I've put up on this slide, especially of practitioners and researchers and advisors who've just worked so diligently on this foundational research over the past 2 years. This slide lists them all, but their titles and all their information are also on the website as well. So let's see. I think, Dan, are you going to toss questions at us?
Yep. Yeah, we've got some questions. So let me start with this one. May I ask if it's not me asking, it's the person who typed this. May I ask if the survey of English-speaking ALA-accredited programs was limited to the U.S., or did it also include Canada?
Right. So all ALA-accredited programs, with the exception of the University of Puerto Rico and University of Montreal, were part of this, and that was because we were doing deep dives into their curriculum and websites, and they were in Spanish and French, and that was not within our ability to do that translation and that depth for those. So every one of the ALA accredited programs. Mm-hmm.
All right. Did you ultimately have a mechanism for seeing which competencies are developed during MLIS programs versus which are acquired mostly on the job?
Right. So I think we addressed that in that last section there. And if you have further questions about that, I think that's sort of exactly what Carolyn presented on in this section. And the bottom line was, the majority of people get them on the job. It's a real opportunity for MLIS programs that exist.
I would add that I think some, again, if we really looked at the MLIS curriculum and where this might fit, I think things like basic budgeting could certainly be a part of a formalized program. I'm seeing in chat too that some people did actually have some very good programming coursework as part of their MLIS program, and I would love to hear again, like, what are those things that they covered that were very transferable when you went into your profession and your first job. For me, I was actually hired by my library as a writer, and then working also in public relations, and that led often to event planning, because there are things like new library openings or special celebrations and things like that. And then over the course of time, as our library started to have a bigger focus and emphasis on programming, then as having done some of that work before, I was able to kind of plug into other types of skills that I needed to do, more programming-specific things. And the librarian part for me came much later, and that was actually nice because up to that point I had been working with my librarian colleagues to put together these programs, and after I was through the MLIS, I got to see how all of that was put together, how collections and programming all support each other to deliver excellent service.
Yeah, and I think, Carolyn, your experience and some of what I'm hearing in chat, and also what we saw during our research, was that there are many secondary careers, that lead to librarianship, and those sometimes those initial skills really have come to bear and are filtering through in sort of evolving hiring practices and job descriptions too.
Yeah, early on in my programming work, I was hiring people from children's museums. I was hiring, for example, someone from the Portland Chinese Classical Garden who did events there. I hired someone who used to run after-school programs. So none of those people were librarians, because at that point in time, this was not a huge emphasis in the librarian profession in our system. Programming was like maybe 10% of most of our librarians' jobs. Most of the jobs were focused on collection development and direct public service, and some staff training kinds of things. So got like a teeny tiny piece of most people's jobs. So to create that capacity, I had to go out and find people that were from other professions that had done this work. I'm really glad to hear that now, more recently, this is becoming a bigger part of a librarian's job.
Yeah. Hey, Dan, before you give us the next question, I want to surface one that came to me via private chat, which is a clarification question that I think I'd like to address. Someone said that there were concerns that our data group, our group of librarians surveyed and interviewed, focused on folks who could attend ALA, and that would lead to representation really only from those larger, wealthier institutions who can afford to go to an annual conference. And I must assure you that this was one of our very much forefronted concerns, that for both of our research questions, we were absolutely determined and conscientious about bringing in voices that are not as represented. So there was multiple deployments of our surveys. We worked with the Association of Rural and Small Libraries to pull together librarians to speak with on phone calls and interview virtually. We looked at, and among the groups that we sort of intentionally redeployed to and made sure we could recruit so that there was adequate representation, because programming is something that is common to all types of libraries, were librarians working in rural areas and small communities, tribal librarians, research and academic librarians to get a large enough voice there, state librarians, special librarians, academic instructors, and K through 12 school librarians. So they were all well represented within this research. And if you look at the summative report, there is lots of details and that really inform sort of questions that need to be explored, especially for the challenges that some of these underrepresented segments of the field experience in being able to offer programming and becoming trained to acquire these competencies and skills.
All right. Can you talk about some of the next steps you have in mind regarding your continued research on programming?
Well, sure. Carolyn, do you want to field this from your perspective on the research committee? I don't want to.
I think this, first phase of research really identified that we need more research.
Right.
It was a big lift, just to all get on the same page about, speaking the same language and having a shared vocabulary about what a program is. I from our section, the part that we worked on around competencies, I would like to hear, where those effective coursework is happening, where the effective coursework is happening in preparing people for programming, and try to get that to be an essential part of the MLIS curriculum and maybe even required at a lot of other different programs. And then for continuing education, I think this has just been really helpful, all of both the research work and hearing from people through the webinars and on programming librarians about what you need now in your work to do this work effectively. And I think that's going to be really helpful for the Public Programs Office, in putting together other learning opportunities going forward. And also if people, if there are tools that, can be developed and are already developed that could be shared with our colleagues. Again, I'm just loving looking at chat because so many people are talking about, even better examples about how they work with partners, how they identify as partners. I think if you can get a dialogue going, that can be helpful as well.
Yeah, I agree. So everything Carolyn said, some of our immediate next steps, have to be to will be informed by the feedback we receive. This has been a really transparent research process and project, and it has been practitioner-driven, truly. So our next steps, many of them will be truly determined by the feedback we receive from the field. We are eliciting feedback from many different sectors and sharing this research. And we, of course, especially sitting here at ALA, this really informs opportunities that the association is currently looking at as part of our strategic goals regarding professional development and, the opportunities there. We want to flesh out the different levels of these competency areas and look at that. And then there is a real need, I think, to explore some of the areas that I mentioned before, small and rural libraries and the unique challenges that they face on so many levels in acquiring and being able to staff to support their community needs. So there's so many fantastic questions related to this regarding space as well and place. Our hope is, of course, that this research is also embraced and built upon, by the field. I hope that answers your question. And we hope IMLS gives us a little more funding to keep going. So we're working on that.
Yes, we all hope for that. Let's see. Any suggestions on closing the gap between library schools and libraries for training and education on programs?
Yeah, I think I talked a little bit about that. Finding again where that coursework is helpful and transferable to when you're out in the field and doing this work, and trying to replicate that is either in the formal setting, or there are pieces of that could be part of continuing education once you are doing this work. I saw a lot of the questions also were about staffing and staff time to do these programs. And, that kind of relates back to that example I gave where, when I started doing this work, a librarian's job description had very little time set aside to do this kind of thing. And it really took, from the administrative level to say, programming is something, it's an essential service. It's not, an extra service, but it's an essential service and a way of delivering information to people. And then to have that shift in your job descriptions at your libraries to say that, maybe 25% of your job is programming, and, we're going to help you get the skills and competencies you need to be able to do that work effectively.
Okay. Most public libraries rely heavily on library assistants to do programming in lieu of actually having a librarian oversee every event. It's one thing that we know these competencies, but how does that get implemented when we aren't the only ones actually running when we aren't the ones actually running the program?
Yeah, that kind of goes a little bit to what I was talking about a librarian's job, and we're undergoing a shift in our librarian and library assistant job classifications as well. And the librarians are actually being moved more into the design and development of program and then working collaboratively with our library assistants on the delivery of the program. So I think, there's, again, back to our competencies and skills, being able to collaborate, to work across different divisions and, maybe physical locations. If you're having a program that is happening at multiple locations, who's the person in charge of that, the oversight of that? And then on the ground, maybe it's your library assistants that are the ones that are actually in charge of the delivery of the program. So, with, again, it depends on organization and how many resources you have, not only like money, but also bodies to do this kind of work, and where it makes most sense in your organization to have these responsibilities lived. I know some places have it very centralized. That's kind of what we have here. It's very centralized, the development of the programs, and then that gets pushed out to librarians and mostly library assistant staff, that's true, to actually implement.
Okay, I think we've got probably time for one more question. Just based on your research, this is a little bit off topic, but someone said staff time is our biggest limitation with program. Is there an easy fix for this? I don't know if there's an easy one. Is there any fix for that?
I would say, this didn't come out in the research project, but, from my experience, is, we use volunteers a lot for the delivery of programming. So again, maybe it's the librarian or library staff that, have developed it, but on the ground, we use a lot of volunteers to staff programs because you don't necessarily have to sit through the same program on financial planning, 5 times. Once it's a good program and you've seen evaluation, a lot of the on the ground stuff can happen through volunteers. And again, partners. If you have, a partner who is to their benefit to be presenting that program, I see a lot in the chat about health topics and, partnering with hospitals and other sorts of nonprofit organizations and associations and participate, putting together the curriculum, and use their knowledge and expertise, and maybe they're your co-host on the day of, and helping you do the program. I think those are some ways where you can address it. None of us ever has enough time to do these kinds of things.
All right. Well, that takes us to the end of our time. So we want to thank all of our participants today. Thank you for the wonderful questions, conversation, responsiveness. Hope the event was beneficial for everybody. And we want to thank you, Terilyn and Mary, and everyone else at PPO for working with us to put together this event. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Thanks so much, Dan and Colton. And I just wanted to say that for those of you who were not able to view the first webinar, which focused on characterizing and categorizing library public programs, that recording is at NILPPA.org as well, and you'll be receiving a survey right after this. We hope you fill it out, and we need that feedback. And I hope that as you sort of take this in and think about it, you really do share your thoughts with us, because again, this is a practitioner-led effort. We really, in order to go forward, we need to hear from you. But otherwise, we're very excited about it. Terilyn, do you have any final thoughts?
No, like I said, I'm glad to hear that there are things that are happening that support this work. It was not like that when I started, and so I'm gratified to hear that all this work is being done.
Yeah, and I guess one final thought actually is to thank you all. I bet many of you were part of this research, and even if you weren't, you can be in the future, and even if you haven't been, you are doing fantastic programming out there, and you've clearly found the pathway to it, and that is remarkable. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, and we hope that everybody has a wonderful weekend, and hopefully we see most of you at the conference next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.